Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are opening up a remarkable stack of sources that tell a story of a really deliberate, systematic transformation.
It's a story that begins not with strength, but with weakness.
Exactly. With a moment of profound national confusion and a real vacuum of identity. We're journeying back to Germany, immediately after the defeat in World War I.
That period is just so critical. I mean, if you really picture that post-war landscape, you have an exhausted nation, completely, politically fractured.
Right.
And the sources consistently point out that the revolution that created the new Weimar Republic was largely led by the old and the middle-aged. It wasn't a youth movement.
Which created this massive disconnect. The sources, they really flagged this incredible apathy.
Or worse.
Or worse, yeah, this outright rejection among the younger generation for any of the emerging political parties. The soldiers returning home, they didn't sympathize with the revolution. The whole new republic just failed to capture their imagination.
They were rudderless, completely. And this leads us directly to the great paradox of that generation. You had a youth that was deeply fractured, splintering into endless political leagues.
Right wing, left wing, all of it.
All of it.
Yeah.
Socialist, nationalist. Yet, when you look closely at the documents, at the manifestos of these disparate groups, the youth on both extremes had far more in common than they had differences.
That's where it gets really interesting, isn't it? Because both sides shared one fundamental, almost visceral goal. They rejected the old regime, the Kaiser, and any attempt to bring back the status quo. They weren't just looking for a political party. They were looking for a shared sense of mission, an almost sacred mandate, really, to create a new Germany.
They needed belonging, and they needed a leader who could synthesize that fractured energy. And the man who positioned himself to heal these deep internal political and class divides was Adolf Hitler.
His strange early appeal was rooted in the ability, wasn't it, to espouse both radical nationalism and revolutionary socialism somehow at the same time?
He was, as the sources suggest, a political genius in his intentional vagueness.
Right.
By keeping his key terms ill-defined, he could effectively be, all things to all men. He could attract the hardline nationalists dreaming of a restored empire, and also those seeking radical social equality. He was offering a unified identity built on race and a shared purpose.
And that unified identity started small.
Very small. This deep dive focuses on the sources detailing the history of the Hitler Youth, known eventually as the Hitlerjugend. We are tracking its monumental journey from a tiny regional concept born in 1922, back when the NSDAP was still just a Bavarian regional affair,
all the way to a state-enforced monopoly that eliminated all competition and ultimately consumed Germany's young men and women in its final desperate war.
That's our mission today.
To understand how the party harnessed that youth energy, that desperate search for mission, and turned it into a force that went from 0 members to total, absolute state control and just over it. Okay, let's unpack this transformation, starting right with the spark of the idea.
So, our story of the Hitler Youth begins, quite surprising, with a moment of personal rejection.
Yeah, the very first idea for a structured youth organ came from a young man named Gustav Adolf, worked as a piano polisher.
Link is the true, if unlikely, catalyst. The sources detail that in December 1921, he tried to join the fledgling National Socialist German Workers' Party, the NSDAP, but they rejected him.
Because he was too young.
Because he was just under the age of 18. And when he asked if they had a youth division he could join in the meantime, the answer was just no.
So he essentially proposed the concept himself.
He didn't just propose it, he drove it forward. He was invited to build one, which is an immense responsibility to pass off to someone who, by the party's own rules, was still considered a minor. But this eagerness for involvement was exactly what Hitler saw as valuable.
And you can see immediate tension in the early party leaders. Anton Drexler, one of the co-founders, was highly skeptical.
Very. He saw it as an administrative distraction. He reasoned that running what he dismissively called a kindergarten would be too much of a burden when the party was still fighting for its own survival.
Why not just wait and absorb existing organizations later?
That's the short-term view. But the sources note that Link's persistent. He was bombarding Hitler with letters outlining the plan. It worked. Hitler saw the long-term strategic value immediately.
He got it.
He grasped that capturing the loyalty and training the next generation was far more valuable than worrying about the immediate administrative headaches, which was Drexler's concern. This split in vision is crucial. Drexler wanted immediate results. Hitler wanted future soldiers.
And Hitler acted fast. In February 1922, he issued an official circular authorizing of a youth section. But here's the interesting detail, and you hinted at it earlier. This new youth section was immediately and strategically subordinated to the Sturmabteilung, the SA, the party's notoriously brutal and often chaotic paramilitary.
That link was ideological and practical from day one. The organizational statutes were to be worked out by the SA headquarters, immediately tying the youth to the party's street-fighting military corps. They weren't just a political club.
They were an ancillary fighting force from the beginning.
Yes. And then, in March 1922, the public proclamation was published in the Völkischer Beobachter, the party's own newspaper.
The proclamation was very deliberate about its target audience, young male supporters aged 14 to 18 who were deemed too young to handle the full rigor of the essay.
And the core mission wasn't just joining a club. It was explicit preparation, training them for their difficult task in the future and ensuring their shoulders would be strong enough to carry the gigantic weight of the fatherland's coming destiny.
The ideological foundation, the statute points, are where the radicalization is just so clear, even in 19...
It's this potent blend of traditional German youth movement values, calls for reawakening and treasuring German characteristics like love of one's country, with the militant language of enjoying honest, open combat and healthy physical activity.
But then you have the explicit political and racial components interwoven. The statutes called for the rejection of values originating from what they termed jewelry and mammon. Unpack that phrase for us because it's a direct window into the early
That phrase is explicitly anti-Jewish rhetoric. Historically, anti-Semites stereotype Jews as being associated with finance, banking, exploitative capitalism, the pursuit of gold, or mammon, as opposed to productive German labor.
So by rejecting jewelry and mammon, they were tying themselves to an anti-capitalist theme.
While simultaneously targeting a specific racial group, it was economic critique fused with racial hatred, right there in the founding document.
It sounds like they were building an identity that was simultaneously virtuous and aggressive, and they were also promising a new, cohesive German identity, ignoring differences of class, occupation, or social standing.
Exactly. The statutes framed these traditional class divisions as being contradictory to the ancient concepts of a community of race and blood. This was the core appeal to the fractured youth. Forget your job. Forget your social rank. You are united because you share the same racial identity. It was a powerful, organic promise of community.
And what did this organic community actually do?
The initial vision was rigorous and militarist. Weekly meetings, lectures, games requiring maximum physical exertion, and a compulsory extended hike through the countryside every second Sunday. This wasn't passive membership.
They also started their own libraries, didn't they? Filled with voluntarily donated good books to prevent what they called trashy literature, an early attempt at total cultural.
That's right. And the exclusion rules were as clear as the inclusion rules. Membership was strictly limited to Germans between 14 and 18.
Foreigners and Jews were explicitly barred.
And financially, they aimed for mass appeal. Zero membership fees at first, relying instead on generous contributions from party members with greater means. They wanted bodies, not revenue, in the beginning.
Despite the grand official proclamation, the party was still tiny. So when the official public meeting was held on May 13th, 1922, at the packed Bürgerbräukeller, how many showed up?
Only 17 youths actually attended.
17 boys for the future of Germany. A small start, to put it mildly.
Link was formally entrusted with leadership, subordinate to the SA, and he quickly structured the movement into two halves: the Youth League for the 14 to 16-year-olds and the young Sturm Adolf Hitler for the 16 to 18-year-olds.
And that structure immediately caused problems.
It did, not least because the older group wore uniforms that were nearly identical to the SA. Link was ambitious. He established small units outside Bavaria, but the sources indicate he found the local party leadership's narrow-mindedness infuriating.
They were focused on the present, he was focused on the future.
But he also suffered an early financial setback. In May 1923, he launched the first youth magazine, National Young,
which the sources call a financial disaster.
A fiasco which was dead on arrival. It was quickly downgraded to a mere newspaper supplement. Organizational ambition outpaced financial reality.
All of this early structure and ambition, though, it all came crashing down with the beer hall putsch on November 9th, 1920.
It did. And the sources give Link credit for prudence here. He wisely kept the younger members at home, mostly just running messenger tasks.
But the fervor was too high to contain completely. Some of the older boys, already trained to be part of the SA apparatus, couldn't be stopped and got involved in Hitler's doomed march.
And that day marked the effective dissolution of the first NSDAP, the young Sturm Adolf Hitler, and the Youth League. Hitler was imprisoned, and the movement was thrown into chaos.
So we move into the post-putsch wilderness, a period where the party was banned and Hitler was in jail. Gustav Adolf Link, the founder, he tried desperately to keep the flame alive.
He did, but the sources suggest his personal ambition and mistakes ultimately cost him everything.
What happened?
His efforts were well-intentioned, but politically naive. He foolishly decided to reform the Youth League under several different names, which were immediately detected and dissolved by the Bavarian police.
And for his troubles, he was imprisoned.
Yes, and even after his release, he kept making the same critical error, acting independently. In 1925, he formed the German Defense Youth Association and set up shop just across the border in Vogtland, outside of Bavaria's immediate jurisdiction.
This independence was his fatal flaw, wasn't it?
Absolutely. When Hitler was released and reformed the NSDAP later in 1925, the demand was absolute loyalty to the Führerprinzip, the leader principle. Link, by keeping his organization independent and refusing to subordinate himself to the centralized Munich-based party apparatus, was immediately branded a traitor by fellow nationalists who had stayed loyal.
And the sources detail his complete withdrawal from the movement under highly suspect circumstances.
Yes. They suggest he was convicted on what may have been a trumped-up charge of petty theft, which just shattered his reputation and led him to withdraw completely. His final unpublished statement cited intense economic pressure and opposition within the party.
And he noted that officials simply did not understand the youth movement.
It's an incredibly poignant moment. The founder realizes the party is too bureaucratic, too focused on administration to understand the raw, organic need for a youth.
So Link is out, and the political vacuum he left is instantly filled by his own subordinate, Kurt Gruber. This is a critical transition. Gruber, a law student, had avoided the push and had quietly built a formidable structure.
Gruber's success was based on two things: administrative competence and local backing. By the time Hitler was out of jail, Gruber had built a movement of about 2,500 boys in Saxony alone with a functioning administrative apparatus.
And crucially, he had Martin Muchman, a local textile manufacturer who later became a powerful regional party leader, providing financial support.
That financial lifeline is key. It gave Gruber a degree of independence from the central Munich bureaucracy, which Link lacked, and which ultimately saved the movement from early party infighting.
But Hitler still had his... He initially tasked Edmund Heinz, one of Röhm's associates, with overseeing all youth matters.
And Heinz was associated with the elitist, predominantly middle-class Hitlerjugend, a rival youth group. This caused an immediate uproar within Gruber's ranks.
So we have a clear class conflict playing out in the source. Gruber's movement was primarily composed of working-class lads and artisans.
How did he handle this threat from the more snobbish academic shill?
He was pragmatic and direct. Gruber went straight to Hitler and warned. He argued that the working class Hitler desperately needed to win over would never associate with such an effeminate and snob like.
And that direct political challenge to the SA's influence, it worked. It did. It demonstrated to Hitler that Gruber was a tough, indispensable organizer. The sources suggest Hitler then put his full faith in Gruber and his working class movement unreservedly.
And that faith was formalized in July 1926 at the Weimar Party rally.
A huge moment. The organization swore a direct personal oath to Hitler, solidifying the Führer principle within the youth ranks, and was officially renamed the Hitlerjugend, or Hitler Youth. Gruber was made Reichsführer, the Reich leader.
The name change solidified their purpose, but the SA, led by Pfeffer von Salomon, immediately tried again to swallow them whole. Why this persistent drive by the SA to subordinate the youth wasn't just for manpower.
It was about control and resources. The SA was the primary street force, and they viewed the youth as their feeder program. After suspicion from Gruber about the SA's motives, a crucial compromise was reached in December 1926.
And this is essential for understanding the HJ's growing autonomy.
It is. All HJ members over 18 had to be party members, and higher appointments required NSDAP agreement. But the HJ maintained its own organizational identity and leadership structure under Gruber.
This also marks another pivotal, the introduction of a formal financial structure. For the first time, a membership fee of 4 pfennigs per month was introduced. It was tiny, but it signaled institutionalization.
It also helped fund their distinct identity. They introduced standardized uniforms that were deliberately not confused with the SA's brown shirts, reinforcing the idea that the HJ was building for the future, not just serving as the SA's little brother.
And Hitler himself began prioritizing the Hitler Youth over the SA in his speeches and planning. Why that strategic shift in focus?
Hitler saw the SA as a short-term revolutionary force, useful for street brawls, for political intimidation. But the HJ, he saw as nation-building for the next century. He spoke of how the HJ had ceased to be organization as an end in itself and was developing its own life.
Going on their own hikes, holding their own meetings.
Right. Focusing on physical and ideological training, separate from the SA's constant political participation. This relative independence and clear purpose helped them grow substantially.
Despite the wider political environment, the NSDAP only winning 12 Reichstags in the 1928 elections, the party itself was surged. Membership climbed from 27,000 to 108,000.
And Gruber used this period of relative calm to expand the organizational scope significantly. This is when the multifaceted structure we recognize today was born. He established the junior groups, the young folk, for 10 to 14-year-old boys, starting the indoctrination earlier.
And equally important, he established the female,
the Bund Deutscher Mädel, or League for German. The party recognized that indoctrination had to be total, encompassing both genders.
Gruber also tried to gain control of information, setting up a new service to break what he called the Jewish monopoly on news. This shows a highly sophisticated understanding of the need for media control, even at the youth level.
Absolutely. But beneath this expansion, the next political conflict was brewing. The rivalry with Baldur von Schirach, who led the National Socialist student. Schirach openly aspired to absorb all youth organizations under his own leadership.
Viewing Gruber's working-class origins as crude.
Exact. Gruber had to fight hard, engaging in intense internal persuasion to keep his subordinates on side and resist Schirach's elitist maneuvering. But his administrative success spoke for itself.
By the 1929 Nuremberg rally, Gruber could point to a clear victory. Membership had exploded from maybe 700 to 1,000 members just a few years earlier to a mass 13,000.
And the sheer commitment displayed was astounding. The sources highlight the dramatic sight of 2,000 boys marching past Hitler, half of whom had walked the entire way from Austria or Berlin, an unbelievable demonstration of ideological commitment they proudly called the Adolf Hitler March.
Gruber must have thought his political victory over Schirach was sealed.
He did, but that optimism quickly faded. The early 1930s saw the return of a brutal political civil war atmosphere, fueled by the staggering unemployment of the Great Depression.
And this period was crucial because it radicalized the Hitler and exposed them tense physical conflict.
The increase in visible political activity immediately caused the state authorities to react. There were regional bans on marches and injunctions against schoolboys becoming members, but these attempts to curb the HJ were profoundly counterproductive.
The sources are unanimous. These restrictions acted as free propaganda. They created a potent, ready-made martyr narrative.
Yes, pupils who were expelled or fined for their membership were instantly seen as persecuted patriots. Boys who ended up in prison claimed the mantle of martyrdom. For these young people, being persecuted for their nationalistic beliefs wasn't a deterrent. It was a source of immense pride. It was proof their cause was the only righteous one.
It was a gift to the propaganda machine. Being illegal only attracted more members because it transformed the HJ from a club into a clandestine revolutionary force.
We see the HJ becoming incredibly effective in its direct, provocative action, often mirroring the tactics of the SA. The famous example cited in the documents is the massive, organized disturbance of the first performances of the anti-war film All Quiet on the Western Front in Berlin and Vienna in December 1930.
And the sources detail how methodical.
Thorough. The HJ members in the SA were so methodical in their disrupt, releasing white mice, chanting, distributing inflammatory pamphlets, that the government was ultimately forced to withdraw the film from circulation entirely in those cities. It was a massive psychological victory. It proved the power of organized youth action to override state authority.
This intense momentum carried through the 1930 election, where the NSDAP soared to 107 Reichstag, and the Hitler Youth were central in that energy. The sources describe an endless routine of rallies, publicity meetings, propaganda marches, and parents.
They were the tireless foot soldiers. They would roar through rural villages, just like the SA, waving banners and singing battle songs. For these young men, often marginalized by the economic depression, this is the first time they felt like they were part of something big, something genuinely important.
Something to live, or perhaps even die for.
But despite the high morale, Gruber's political vulnerability was exposed when Ernst Röhm returned from exile in Bolivia in April 1931 and consolidated power over the SA. Hitler, always prioritizing his paramilitary shock troops, sided with Röhm.
The consequence for Gruber was instantaneous and devastating.
It was. Hitler issued a directive making the HJ directly subordinate to Röhm, the SA staff. The HJ headquarters were forcibly moved from Gruber's independent base in Plauen to Munich, signaling the end of his autonomy and his direct access to Hitler.
And then came the mistake that sealed his fate. Röhm was pressuring him about the slow growth of HJ membership, and in a moment of panic, Gruber blurted out an impossible.
He said he would double membership to 50,000 by the end of 1930, a promise he couldn't possibly keep.
And the sources confirmed that he was just politically outmaneuvered.
Completely. In late 1931, the party headquarters announced that he had accepted his resignation, a resignation he never even submitted. He reportedly learned of his own removal from the morning paper.
And the puppet master here was Baldur von Schirach, who had leveraged his close friendship with Röhm to engineer the takeover he had sought for years.
So now we have the new leader, Baldur von Schirach. And he was a stark contrast to the piano polisher and the working-class law student. Schirach was an administrator from a wealthy background, part Sorbian, part American, far removed from the German working classes.
But he had the crucial asset, full party backing, thanks to Röhm.
Under Schirach, the structure professionalized rapidly. The days of grassroots, unpaid voluntary work ended immediately. Key leadership positions became full-time, salaried official roles, which was a massive recruitment incentive during the peak of unemployment. It offered upward mobility and stability when society offered neither.
Schirach immediately began absorbing all competitors, consolidating power. He swallowed the middle-class National Socialist People's League from Hamburg, an organization already known for intense street violence and physically attacking Jewish and left.
The radicalization was accelerating with official sanction, and the cost of this acceleration was high. Between 1931 and 1933, the sources confirmed 23 Hitler Youth boys lost their lives in the political violence. This reality was immediately woven into the propaganda. Their anthem spoke directly to this violence. We march for Hitler through night and suffering. Our banner means more to us than death.
But the anecdote that the party leveraged most effectively to cement the martyr narrative was the brutal, tragic case of Herbert Norkus. This is a crucial detail that transformed the movement's image.
Norkus was the son of a Berlin taxi driver and a member of the HJ in the Communist district of Wetting. In January 1932, he was sent out to post advertisements for an NSDAP meeting, a peaceful task, the sources stressed. While doing this, he and his comrades were ambushed by a troop of adult communists.
Norkus was caught and stabbed twice and then refused entry by a homeowner. He used his last strength to pull himself up a wall, leaving this horrific trail of bloody handprints.
But the attack didn't stop there. The brutality is shocking. He was dragged into a back street. The autopsy revealed 5 stab wounds in the back, 2 in the chest, and the horrifying detail that his face had been completely mutilated beyond recognition. Specifically, his upper lip had been cut off and couldn't be located. This was vicious, targeted political violence against a minor.
When the German public, and especially the German youth, heard the details of Norkus's fate, it didn't discourage. The sources explicitly state it inspired more boys to join what they now viewed as a great moral cause. It was proof that they were fighting a life-or-death battle against a brutal enemy.
Joseph Goebbels didn't need to invent lies. He simply amplified this horrific truth. The psychological power of this martyrdom was immense. The story of another boy, Vera Gard, crystallized this narrative perfectly with his alleged dying words to his mother. "Don't cry, mother. I know I must die for Hitler."
This moral cause resulted in an explosion of growth in 1930. Internal reports show membership surging from 37,000 in January to over 72,800 by March, and ending the year at almost 108,000.
And this was a cross-section of German society, defying the earlier middle-class perception. The class breakdown in regions like Munich and Upper Bavaria was heavily skewed toward the working class. 69% workers, 10% trade and commerce, and 12% pupils. They were the engine of Hitler's political machine.
When the Brüning government attempted to ban the uniformed branches, the HJ simply renamed itself to the National Socialist.
Illegality only made them more attractive.
Their political victory came in July 1932 when the NSDAP became the largest party with 230. And Hitler recognized their contribution immediately, singling out the HJ for praise, noting their indefatigable effort. They had reportedly distributed over 20 million pamphlets and newspapers in that final.
Schirach himself won a Reichstag seat and organized the Reich Youth Day in Potsdam. Hitler was skeptical of the attendance, but Schirach was right. 100,000 boys and girls showed up, far exceeding the expected 20,000. They came singing, marching, and sleeping rough.
The psychological impact of seeing 100,000 comrades, all dedicated to the same cause, must have been profound for the who had previously operated in small, hostile pockets.
It was. And when Hitler unexpectedly showed up to watch the main march pass, which lasted 7 solid hours, he was reportedly moved to tears. The movement was no longer just a party brand. It was a national, emotionally resonant force.
The moment of total political victory arrived on January 30th, 1933, when Hitler was appointed chancellor, and the immediate consequence for the Hitler Youth was an aggressive, swift move to establish a total monopoly over the entire youth.
The speed of the takeover is striking. Just 2 months later, on April 3, 1933, 50 HJ boys, acting as shock troops, occupied the offices of the Reichscommittee of German Youth Associations in Berlin.
This single brazen move gave Schirach immediate control over approximately 6 million young Germans who were part of that national youth umbrella.
It wasn't a negotiation. It was a hostile corporate takeover executed by teenagers.
Precise. And locally, the HJ units were incredibly zealous in eliminating any remaining political opposition. Following the Reichstag fire, they acted on their own initiative, raiding local headquarters of the Social Democratic Youth.
The sources note that these arbitrary acts were so violent, they often required the police to intervene, not to protect the HJ, but to stop them from further destroying SPD property.
And the conservative group, seeing the sheer ruthlessness and the writing on the wall, quickly.
They consolidated their league, pledged loyalty to Hitler, and immediately excluded Jews from their rank. Within months, the HJ, either directly or through subordinate loyalist organizations, controlled virtually the entirety of Germany's organized youth.
The institutional resistance was minimal. The
Protestant church itself was too fractured and weak to maintain organized resistance, and its youth sections quickly collapsed and were absorbed.
The only notable exception was the Catholic, and this was only due to a specific agreement. The Concordat worked out between the regime and the Vatican.
Even then, Schirach played his hand carefully. He understood the need for broad appeal. He publicly distanced himself from the most extreme anti-Christian elements within the NSDAP, famously stating, "I shall not suffer in this youth movement anyone who does not believe in God." This allowed him to absorb huge swaths of the previously Protestant.
By June 1934, Schirach's status was completely elevated. He became youth leader of the German Reich, not just of the NSDAP.
And the sources emphasize the gravity of this title. The foundation of any new youth movement now required his explicit consent, which of course was never granted. The monopoly was absolute.
The organization was then solidified into its final all-encompassing structure for 10 to 18-year-olds, the Young Volk and Hitler Youth for boys, and the Jungmädelbund and BDM for girls. This meant that every young person in Germany was now classified, organized, and tracked by the state.
But the massive, rapid influx of millions of members immediately caused a logistical breakdown. The sources call it a horrifying bureaucratic nightmare, and an acute lack of trained, experienced leaders capable of indoctrinating this mass of children.
So what was the solution?
The party's solution was systematic, almost industrial. They established leadership schools. The first was at Potsdam in 1933. And by 1934, there were 22 of these schools offering methodical, centralized training. This was crucial. They needed to manufacture a uniform leadership class dedicated to the ideology.
And the syllabus of these schools, it tells the whole story of the institution.
It does. Grueling physical training, rifle shooting, detailed instruction on racial principles, and naturally, German history rewritten to fit the Nazi narrative.
Schirach, recognizing the need for ideological purity, declared 1934 the year of training, demanding complete surrender to the National Socialist world.
He stated that the best member was the one who was completely permeated by the idea. It was about internalizing the mission, not just following order.
And this ideological focus was coupled with a push for vocational and physical utility. The Reich Vocational Contest, started in 1934, assessed 500,000 boys and girls on their job skills, providing valuable centralized data on national training.
And by 1939, that number ballooned to 3.5 million participants.
Physical standards became mandatory, standardized, and competitive. An annual athletics competition was introduced for all 10 to 18-year-olds, requiring specific performance metrics to win a special medal. This was physical conditioning for the inevitable war.
This institutional life also involved cultural erasure. The HJ acquired its own radio broadcast, and one of the first things they attacked was the wearing of traditional school cap. Why were these caps such a target?
It was pure class warfare, wasn't it? Aligned perfectly with the movement's anti-class rhetoric.
Exactly. Those caps were emblems of traditional middle-class educational institutions, the gymnasiums.
Yeah.
And they clearly marked class distinctions and academic elitism. Banning and publicly burning them was a symbolic act, reinforcing the idea that the HJ community of blood superseded all existing social hierarchy.
All these institutional measures culminated in the landmark 1936 law concerning the Hitlerjugend. This fundamentally changed German childhood from that point on.
This law made membership compulsory from age 10. Crucially, it legally placed the physical, spiritual, and ethical education of the German youth under HJ control, effectively making the HJ an equal partner with the school and the home. The state had legally monopolized childhood.
And every year, on April 20th, Hitler's birthday, new members swore the oath. "I promise in the Hitler Youth to do my duty at all times in love and faithfulness to help the Führer, so help."
It's a pledge of duty and devotion that was utterly binding. But the oath was only the culmination of a rigorous entry process. New members underwent a 2 to 6 month probation, concluded by a special test combining sport, close combat skills, ideological knowledge, and the most notorious element, the mud probe, the courage test.
Let's dedicate some time to this mud probe. This was not standard scouting fare. What did this courage test entail, and what was its psychological purpose?
The sources describe the mud probe as a definitive psychological break from civilian life. It often took the terrifying form of having to jump in full battle dress and boots from the window of the first floor of a block of flats or crawling across beams high above the ground. It was designed to instill a complete disregard for self-preservation and a blind trust in the organization.
And if they passed this combined test, which included mastering the anti-Jewish ideological doctrine, they were entitled to wear the scout knife.
A knife deliberately shaped similarly to the bayonet of the German army. The symbolism is inescapable. The badge of honor was a weapon.
Hitler explicitly addressed this focus on creating an emotionally hardened generation at the 1934 Nuremberg rally. He declared, "We want a people that is not soft but hard as flint," and demanded the youth learn to overcome hardships and privations.
The goal was to eliminate any trace of bourgeois softness and ensure the new generation was courageous and proud and, most importantly, ready to fight.
Pre-war militarization escalated rapidly under the guise of training. Obergebietsführer Schirach's famous remark sums up the priority shift, doesn't it? He found it absurd that a nation would spend hours perfecting handwriting and spelling when not a single hour was available.
He wanted a rifle to rest as competitively in the hand of the German youth as did the pen.
By 1937, the first rifle school was established, and by 1938, the militarization was systemic. 1.5 million HJ were being trained in rifle, often supervised directly by the OKW, the German High Command. They were building an auxiliary army.
And the final piece of legislation before the war, the 1939 Youth Service Law, mandated compulsory annual public service for 16 to 18-year-olds. This focused on agricultural help for the boys and domestic assistance, or help with families, for the girls. They were fully integrated into the economic and social fabric of the state.
Ready for the war machine to turn on.
By the time the war broke out, the sources conclude, this generation was more than prepared. Most of the boys and girls had gone through 6 years of disciplined, mandatory training that systematically instilled every necessary skill and value to prepare them for the inevitable national struggle.
The war dramatically changed the character of the Hitler. Baldur von Schirach was moved to become governor of Vienna, and Arthur Axmann, who lost his right arm serving on the Eastern Front early in the war, took his place in mid-19. Axmann proved to be a highly efficient and ruthless organization.
And the monotony of institutionalized life instantly vanished. The organization regained that initial profound sense of purpose it sought post-WWII by actively participating in the great national struggle.
Even mundane activities felt vital. Delivering ration cards monthly to households, a job that replaced the postmen who are now at the front, was an act of patriotism.
With nearly 9 million boys and girls at their disposal, the HJ was immediately integrated into the war economy and logistics. Physically fit school formers were drafted right away to bring in the harvest, often marking the end of their schooling forever.
And they were used for relentless collection drives.
Yes, recycling scrap metal, brass, copper, paper, and bottles became patriotic exercise. The boys would salute smartly and keep returning to collect the valuable material. During the desperate first winter of the Russian campaign, the HJ went door to door requesting cherished, functional items like...
The sources note that the fervor was so intense and the compliance so widespread that the supply of donated skis actually ended up meeting the demand. It highlights the extent to which the German population had been mobilized children.
The girl service, the BDM, was equally crucial. In 1940 alone, they assisted in over 318,000 homes, often filling the roles of wives or mothers whose husbands were serving. They worked tirelessly in the Red Cross, in army hospitals, and stood at railway stations offering food and drink to troops in transit. They were the essential backbone of the home.
A less discussed but ethically challenging role for the youth was their service in annexed regions like Poland, assisting with resettlement programs. This is where the children encountered the practical brutality.
They were actively involved in expelling Poles from their home to make way for ethnic Germans moving into the region. The sources indicate that the children themselves felt a deep sense of unease, even asking questions about the morality of seizing property.
So how did the HJ apparatus justify this brutality to the children who were carrying it out?
They employed strategic and often false reassurances. They claimed that the Poles were being resettled to farms previously vacated by arriving ethnic Germans or moved to the general government, a separate, less developed administrative region. This was often a lie, as there simply weren't enough farms.
The key justification used to override their unease was historical.
Exactly. They were constantly reminded that the Poles had done the exact same thing to German farmers after WWII. It was framed as righteous historical revenge.
The major shift to direct combat involvement began in January 1943 with the critical need for flak help. HJ boys began manning Germany's anti-aircraft batteries, filling the gap left by older men drafted.
This wasn't training. It was real, immediate combat. Older boys manned the guns. Younger ones, initially below the age of 14, served in critical support roles like communication, operating searchlights, and acting as dispatch riders during raids.
The danger was constant. In October 1943, a searchlight position was hit, killing the entire crew, all of whom were confirmed to be below the age of 14.
This tragedy forced the clarification of age guidelines, but it didn't stop the practice. We have this chilling witness account from the period detailing a boy wounded in a bombing raid who had a soft, round child's face, yet tried to come to attention while injured. His words capture the ideological depth of their indoctrination. Yes, but this is not important. Germany must be victorious.
The individual sacrifice was meaningless compared to the national goal.
And beyond direct air defense, the HJ helped manage the domestic chaos of the bombing campaign, seeking out vacant or single-occupancy flats to rehouse bombed-out civilians, often requiring police intervention because the current occupants were reluctant to share or move out.
But the most famous and devastating deployment was the creation of the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend in 1940. While official recruitment targeted 17 and 18-year-olds, the sources confirm that 16-year-olds and sometimes even younger boys made it into the division.
These were the true products of the Schirach-era boys, raised entirely under the NSDAP regime, indoctrinated since age 10. They possessed an extremely strongly developed esprit de corps, a unity born from shared ideological training and constant competition.
Their first engagement was during the Allied invasion in Normandy in June 1940. Despite being heavily targeted by Allied fighter bombers during their difficult 70-mile march to the front near Cannes, they pushed on and demonstrated immediate, shocking effectiveness against veteran Canadians.
They destroyed 28 Canadian tanks at a cost of only 6 of their own in that initial counterattack. An Australian war reporter noted they fought with a tenacity and ferocity seldom equal. They were completely fearless.
The Allied perspective underscored their fanaticism. One British tank commander recalled that the boys attacked their tanks like wolves, forcing the hardened professionals to kill the boys against our will. This division represented the new, fanatical National Socialist breed of soldier that the regime had successfully engineered.
But the sacrifice was unsustainable. Within a single month in Normandy, the division lost 20% killed, 40% missing or wounded, and 50% of its vehicles. Field Marshal von Rundstedt commented mournfully on their fate. It is a pity that this faithful youth is sacrificed in a hopeless situation.
As the war drew to its desperate conclusion, every available male was thrown into the fight. The Volkssturm, the Home Guard, created in October 1944, mandated compulsory military service.
But recruits were often much younger or much older than the legal age, with accounts detailing 11-year-olds easily firing the Panzerfaust anti-tank weapon.
Axmann drove this dedication to the absolute extreme, proclaiming that the youth must know no bounds in your love to your people and equally no bounds in your hatred of the enemy. He demanded unshakable faithfulness to Hitler until final annihilation.
And the boys were faithful to the end. In Breslau, in March 1945, HJ regiments caused absolute chaos for the advancing Russians with fanatical counterattack, holding what the proud locals dubbed the Hitler Youth Corner until May 9th.
Most famously, they fought in the Battle of Berlin. Axmann ordered battalions to defend the pickled bridges, vainly hoping for a relief army. An officer noted in his diary the staggering attrition. Of the roughly 5,000 HJ boys available at the start, only 500 were still combat-effective fighters.
The desperation led to brutality enforced by their own side. Accounts detail 13-year-olds being fetched from their homes by SS and police and thrown into the fight. The fanatical adherence was deadly. One 15-year-old Schirach, a platoon leader who refused to fight, was immediately strung up on the nearest tree by SS and SA men. They were forced to be fanatics or face death by their comrades.
In his last public appearance on his 5th birthday, Hitler emerged from his bunker to award decorations to boys defending Berlin, including Iron Crosses to several 12. This image, a dictator awarding medals to children who were about to die, is the final tragic symbol.
The end came only after Hitler's suicide. The final scene from the sources is heartbreaking. An endless column of American Sherman tanks rumbled down Munich's Maximilianstrasse. A group of boys aged 10 to 14 had Panzerfausts aimed at the tank, but having no further orders and no belief left, they just couldn't bring themselves to fire. They surrendered in their thousands, and the myth of organized resistance, the werewolf, never materialized.
Their war was over, but their childhood had been stolen, and they faced a post-war world that regarded the very ideology they had been manufactured to believe in as
When we synthesize this profound 23-year history, we see a clear trajectory of deliberate, systematic monopolization. It started with a fractured group of youths looking for belonging post-WWII, found focus as an independent working-class street movement under Gruber, and then became a state-mandated institution under Schirach that eliminated all competition and indoctrinated every single German child.
What stands out in the sources is the sheer administrative genius in weaponizing the natural desire for purpose. We've traced the constant systematic training from the rigorous physical requirement, intense ideological education at the leadership schools, and finally the psychological audacity of the Mutt probe, the courage test, which conditioned them to discard self-preservation.
That sustained pressure, coupled with the hard-as-flint rhetoric and the tactical use of the martyr narrative turning real violence against them into propaganda, successfully manufactured a generation ready to fight fanatically. The Flak Helpers, the BDM, and the 12th SS Panzer Division were the ultimate product of that ideological training, forcing hardened veterans on the opposing side to fight and kill children against their will. Their youth was entirely constructed for war and self-sacrifice.
So what does this all mean for us today? The sources consistently highlight that in that political vacuum of the 1920s, the German youth craved a deep sense of mission and belonging to something larger than themselves, something that gave their personal heart.
This raises an important question that connects directly to those raw, powerful motivations we saw driving the youth in post-WWII Germany. What lessons do these accounts hold about the role of ideology and organizational structure in channeling that powerful natural desire of young people to be part of something big?
And more importantly, what functional positive systems, be they civic, educational, or cultural, are robustly in place today to effectively offer that crucial sense of mission and genuine belonging outside of destructive political or ideological.
That is certainly provocative thought. The power of purpose, for good or for ill.
We've reached the end of our deep dive into this profound and challenging